Introduction, ladies and gentlemen, shalom, shalom from Israel. Here it's now in evening time. I'm very honored to be with you. Our session tonight, Israel at War, and we are going to talk about some geostrategic perspective of this whole event, this whole situation. In front of you, you could see the agenda of our session today. I'm going to start with some short introduction talking about Gaza. You see in front of you the map of Israel. You see it's a kind of like a three-dimensional map. The brighter parts that you see are basically not part of Israel. To the right-hand side, you see this area that is called the West Bank or the Palestinian territories or Judea and Samaria. It depends, of course, who defines that. Partly controlled by the Palestinian Authority, partly controlled by Israel as of today. To the left-hand side, you see in the bottom the tip of an Arab state called Egypt. And in between Egypt and Israel, you could see this bright part indicating Gaza Strip, a very small area, a very narrow strip, some 8 by 20 miles, populated by some 2 million Palestinians. Some major milestones in the contemporary history of Gaza Strip. Between 1948 and 67, Gaza Strip was ruled by Egypt, though it was not annexed to Egypt, but it was ruled by Egypt. Following the 67 war, Israel occupied Gaza Strip and Israel ruled Gaza Strip until 2005. During that period of time, Israel did not annex Gaza Strip to Israel. However, Israeli governments established communities, Israeli communities. Some people refer to them by the name of settlements. In Gaza Strip, there were 21 communities / settlements with some 10,000 Israelis living in Gaza Strip until 2005. In 2005, Israeli government passed a law called the disengagement, and based upon that law, Israel totally pulled out from Gaza Strip, totally evacuating Gaza Strip, including all the people that lived, the Israelis that lived in Gaza Strip and all the Israeli military forces that used to be present in Gaza Strip to secure the Israeli communities. Parallel to that, Israel handed control in Gaza Strip over the hands of the Palestinian Authority. This is an authority that has been formally established following the Israeli PLO agreement in 1993, rather known as the Oslo Accords. However, the rule of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza Strip did not last for long, because a year and a half after that, in the summer of 2007, Hamas, an Islamic military Palestinian organization that was born in Gaza Strip in the 1980s, violently crushed the rule of the Palestinian Authority, its own brothers actually, and since 2007, Hamas has been governing Gaza Strip. Of course, as I'm sure all you are aware, on October 7, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, the second largest Palestinian military organization in Gaza Strip, conducted a massive attack on the state of Israel, on the southern communities bordering Gaza Strip. I'm sure that you are all familiar with the events of that horrific attack. I do not need to elaborate on that. Following that, Israel has declared a war on Gaza Strip and Hamas. An Israeli Defense Army, the Israeli Defense Forces, has been operating in Gaza Strip since late October up until today. I'm sure that you have been following the reports coming from Gaza Strip. As of now, obviously the eyes are focused on the area that is called Rafah. You see this map of Gaza Strip in front of you. Rafah is the most southern part of Gaza Strip. It's actually a town or a city, originally with some 250,000 people living in Rafah, which is kind of like a congregation of both refugee camps as well as neighborhoods that are assembling the whole area that is known as Rafah. You see that Rafah is actually sitting on the borderline between Gaza and Egypt. This is about 8 miles long borderline. You see this line in front of you marked on a black line on the map right in front of you. And actually part of Rafah is based on both Egyptian side as well as the Gaza side of the border. Following the Israeli military moves in Gaza Strip, massive populations in Gaza Strip flee down towards the area of Rafah. And at some point, it was estimated there were some 1.2 million Palestinians assembled in the area of Rafah. However, in the last couple of weeks, when Israel started also operating in Gaza, in the area of Rafah, in the south part of Gaza, after being operating in the northern and central part of Gaza, dismantling Hamas military power, estimated at some 24 battalions, Israel focused in the last couple of weeks in the area of Rafah. And as part of that, Israel has evacuated most of the Palestinian citizens who flee to Rafah as an outcome of the fights between Israel and Hamas in the previous months that took place in central and northern part of Gaza. You see in front of you this map that shows you the major locations where two Palestinians, civilians were evacuated from Rafah to safe areas. These are areas that has been basically established by Israel and prepared by Israel to absorb this mass amount of people that needs, of course, to be attended. All the everyday life needs has to be attended, as you can understand. And so Israel has evacuated most of the people from Rafah, speak the civilians, to those safe areas that you see in front of you on this map. As you probably know, right now there are 120 Israelis hostages in Gaza Strip, most of whom were kidnapped, of course, during the October 7 attack on Israel. I'm sure that you are all familiar with all the details regarding that day. Up until now, Israel has been either rescue some of the hostages. You probably remember the last Saturday Israeli operation in the area of Nuseirat, a Palestinian refugee camp in center part of Gaza Strip, resulting in the rescue of 4 Israeli hostages alive. In other cases, unfortunately, the attempts to rescue the hostages ended up with, unfortunately, either the killing of the hostages or they were already killed by Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and or by Hamas, by Palestinians from Gaza Strip who also participate, civilians, in the attack on October 7. We know that some of those hostages were kept by civilians in Gaza Strip. How did we get here? I would like to open the scope and talk about this whole war in a wider perspective as it should be addressed. And I would say that this war is actually a conjunction of accumulating major processes and developments that took place in the Middle East for the last decades. This war did not really start on October 7. It has started way before October 7, and there are basically 2 major deep stream factors that resulted in the end of the day that war. One is the inner Palestinian power struggle over leadership, and the other one is Iran's hegemonic vision. In the next couple of minutes, I will elaborate on that and explain how and why those 2 processes resulted in the end of the day, that war. Let me start with the story of the inner Palestinian power struggle over leadership.
Avi,
I'm sorry.
Your slides are not working, and I haven't been able to reach Maya.
The slides are not working?
No.
Let me try again and see if I can reload it, and I hope that it's going to work now. I'll do share screen again.
You're in the wrong mode. Someone said you're in the wrong mode. Got it. That's it.
Can you see that?
Yes. Yes.
But this whole time we didn't see it, so if there's anything.
The whole time we didn't see it. That's a shame. Anyhow, now you could see it, right? Can you see it now?
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. The inner Palestinian power struggle has to do in a large extent to a wider power struggle in the Arab world in the 20th century, and this is the power struggle over the whole idea of national statehood. We have to remember that until the 20th century, the people of the Middle East were ruled by an Islamic large entity called the Turkish Ottoman Empire. During that time, there were no national statehood. It didn't exist in the Middle East. And so when the Turkish Ottoman Empire came to an end in the First World War, the people of the Middle East were introduced to the concept of national statehood. And right there from the beginning, there has been an ongoing power struggle, ideologically, culturally, politically, emotionally, between different camps in the Muslim and the Arab world, vis-a-vis this whole thing that is called national statehood. One of the camp, a very proactive and present camp in this power struggle, is the Islamic camp, and its most well-known representative, the Muslim Brotherhood, a movement that was established in Egypt in 1928. The Muslim Brotherhood became the biggest mass movement in the Muslim Sunni world. The Muslim Brotherhood ideologically and practically and politically totally rejected the concept of national statehood, and they basically envision a creation of a global entity called caliphate, an Islamic-based entity where people will live their life according to the Islamic religious codex, rather known as the Sharia law. Why should people live their life according to that law? Well, because according to the Islamic theologists, the Sharia law is a master plan that was given to mankind by Allah himself, the God, and therefore it's flawless, it's perfect. 60 years after the Muslim Brotherhood were established in Egypt, Hamas was born in Gaza Strip. Hamas is a word in Arabic which means a religious enthusiasm. It is a Palestinian military organization that defines itself formally as the offspring of the Muslim Brotherhood in Palestine. Hence, you can understand that Hamas basically rejects the concept of national statehood and endorses the concept of global Islamic entity called caliphate. I mean, there is some irony in the fact that there are some people today, you probably know, that are chanting the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," thinking that by doing that, they are echoing Hamas' ultimate objective. That is not Hamas' ultimate objective. Hamas views the establishing of a Palestinian state on the ruins of the state of Israel only as an interim phase towards the final objective, which is establishing of an Islamic caliphate, a global Islamic caliphate. Hamas vows to eliminate Israel through the use of violence. There should be no concessions, no negotiations, and no peace process. Israel must be eliminated according to Hamas ideology because there are very strong anti-Jewish, anti-Zionist, and anti-Israel segments within both Muslim Brotherhood, the mother movement of Hamas, and of course Hamas itself. One other thing about Hamas is the fact that Hamas is the initials of the word Hamas are in Arabic Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, the Islamic resistance movement. Remember this term resistance. We will get back to that shortly because it's very significant. So this is one major Palestinian power factor, the Hamas, that was born in Gaza Strip in the 1980s and ruled since 2007 Gaza Strip after violently terminating the rule of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza Strip. And that brings me to talk about the other major Palestinian player, and this is the Palestinian Authority, and particularly the spine of the Palestinian Authority, which is a kind of like an umbrella for different Palestinian organizations. And the spine of the Palestinian Authority is the Fatah movement. Fatah was established before Hamas, already back in the late 1950s. Differently from Hamas, Fatah rejects the concept of global Islamic caliphate. Differently from Hamas, Fatah vows and endorses the concept of independent national statehood, meaning Fatah's ultimate objective is a Palestinian state, not a caliphate. Differently from Hamas, Fatah don't think that people should live their life according to the Islamic religious codex. Why? Because some of the Palestinians are not Muslims, they are Christians. And finally, if differently from Hamas, who vows to eliminate Israel through the use of violence, Fatah, who is the major spine of the Palestinian Authority and also the major spine of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, that signed an agreement with Israel in 1993, the Oslo Accord. By signing the agreement, Fatah basically accepts the idea that Israel has the right to exist, and Fatah is willing to take the path of reconciliation. So right there you see that there are major differences between the two major Palestinian players, and they are both fighting for the leadership of the Palestinian people, their path, and of course the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So this is one component. This is the story of the inner Palestinian power struggle between Fatah and Hamas. The other part has to do with the story of the Iranian hegemonic vision. In 1979, there is a very dramatic event in the Middle East, an Islamic revolution in Iran. Iran becomes a Shiite theocracy under the leadership of what is known as the Mullah regime. Let us explain a little bit what does those terms stand for. You cannot understand the history of the Middle East and the Middle East today without understanding two major axes of power struggle that shaped the Middle East through centuries. One is a power struggle within Islam. Islam is the major religion of most people of the Middle East since Islam emerged in the Arab Peninsula in the 7th century. Very quickly, Islam turned into a conquering empire, and very quickly, it has been encompassed with a power struggle over the leadership of that empire. That power struggle resulted in 1400 years ago, a split within the Muslim world. Majority of the Muslims, about 85%, are known as Sunnis, meaning the people that are following the path of the Prophet Muhammad. The minority of the Muslims in the world, about 13%, are known as Shia, or the full term is Shi'at Ali, the political faction of Ali. Ali was the fourth caliph, the fourth king of the Muslim empire in the 7th century, and he was the son-in-law and cousin of Prophet Muhammad. He was assassinated, and also his son, who claimed the crown, also were killed over the questions of the leadership of the Muslim world. This power struggle within Islam in the 7th century resulted in these two camps, Sunnis majorities, who argue that leadership of the Muslim world should not be done by a person that is necessarily related to the Prophet by a bloodline, but by a person that has the right skills to do that job. The Shia, however, argue that leadership of the Muslim world can be and should be done only by a male descendant of the fourth Muslim caliph, Ali, that I mentioned before. For the last 1400 years, Sunnis and Shiite has been butchering each other. The theological, cultural, emotional, political narratives gaps between the two camps are non-bridgeable, though they are both Muslims. Another major power struggle axis is the power struggle between three major ethnic civilizations in the Middle East who also happen to be Muslims. One is the Arab civilization that was born in the Arab Peninsula, represented here to the left-hand side with this green script that says Allah, the God. Arabs gave birth to Islam. Islam was born in the Arab civilization. Majority of the Arabs are Sunnis, and of course they are speaking Arabic. By the way, today majority of the Muslims in the world are not Arabs in their ethnicity. They are not from the Arab Peninsula and they don't speak Arabic. However, Arab civilization gave birth to Islam, and Islam was deeply entrenched with the Arab civilization traditions and customs. In the center, you see the lion representing the Persian civilization, an ancient civilization that actually became during history a Sunni Muslim, a Shiite Muslim civilization. But the Persians are not Arabs. They are not from the Arab Peninsula. They are from Persia, which is Iran of our time. The Persians don't speak Arabic. They speak Farsi. And they are predominantly, as I said before, Shia, not Sunnis. And the third civilization to the right-hand side is Turkey, represented in this red crescent and star. The Turks are neither Arabs nor Persians. They are not from the Arab Peninsula and they are not from Persia. They are from Central Asia. They don't speak Arabic and they don't speak Farsi. Surprisingly enough, they are speaking Turkish. Most of the Turks are Sunni Muslims. So you got these three major ethnical civilizations who are also happen to be Muslims. You got Arab civilization, Persian civilization, Turkish civilization, and they are fighting for influence and leadership of the region for centuries. Going back to the story of the mullah regime, the mullahs, by the way, are the Shiite clergies, and they are structures like officers in the army. The founder of the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979 was Ruhollah Ayatollah Khomeini. Ruhollah Ayatollah is not his name. This is his rank within the Shiite clergy order. So in 1979, when the mullah regime comes to power in Iran, Iran becomes a Shiite theocracy. And one of the major deep narratives that inspired the mullah regime is the narrative that argued that the Shiites have been deprived of the right to lead the Muslim world already back in the 7th century, as you may recall. And so one of the things that really moves this regime is the concept of exporting the Islamic revolution across the region and beyond the region. This narrative, this vision has been translated into an operational mindset, the creation of what is known as the Shiite crescent. You see the map in front of you that illustrates that crescent, and in the left-hand side, you see the places where this crescent is crossing from, starting in Gaza Strip through Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, of course, Iran, Bahrain, Yemen. The common denominator of all those places, with the exception of Iran, the common denominator is that these are Arab states or Arab entities in the case of Gaza Strip. And most of the people who live in those areas totally are Sunnis, not necessarily Shiites. And so, however, the Shiite crescent, as you could see, is stretching through those areas in the Middle East. In order to enhance its vision, its imperialistic vision of the Shiite crescent, the mullah regime has been using very effectively a platform under the title that is known as the resistance and defiance, al-muqawama wal-mumana. You may remember that I used this name, the resistance, earlier when I was talking about the initials of Hamas. Remember, Hamas is Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyah, the Islamic resistance movement. The connection between those two terms is not incidental. It's exactly the same term. The ideology of the resistance, the concept of the resistance that became very common in the discussion of the Middle East, particularly in the second part of the 20th century, is an ideology and a concept that is very radical. It is basically vowing to eliminate the state of Israel under the banner of liberating Palestine. It is totally hostile towards Western values and civilization. It vows to eliminate and end Western presence in the Middle East. It views the West and Israel as a foreign body, foreign entity, a cancer that has to be outrooted. And this concept became very common and very popular to a certain extent within many circles in the Arab world. The mullah regime identified that and actually positioned itself as the spearhead of this camp that is going to be known by the name of the axis of resistance and defiance. In Arabic, محور المقاومة والممانعة. Positioning itself as the head, the spirit of this camp, the mullah regime was able to create a network of armies of terror stretching across the Middle East. You could see the map in front of you that illustrates that structure. Again, overlapping with what I showed you before, starting in Gaza through Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen. The mullah regime has been able in the last couple of decades to build a network of armies of terrors that act as proxies of the mullah regime, enhancing and advancing the Shiite crescent imperialistic vision. When you look at the structure of these armies of terror, there is something interesting about this network. It is totally based on non-Iranians. You will not find Iranians on those armies of terror. They are all based upon Arabs, some of whom, or most of whom, are Shiite Arabs. For example, in Lebanon, an Arab state bordering Israel from the north, the Iranian regime established in the early 1980s what is going to become its most powerful proxy, an army of terror called Hezbollah, two words in Arabic, which means the party of God. The Hezbollah in Lebanon is based upon Shiite Lebanese. They are Arabs in their ethnicity. They are Lebanese in their national identity. They are Shiites in their religious identity. And the Hezbollah in Lebanon, first and foremost, prioritizes the fact that it is Shiite before the fact that it is Arab or Lebanese. And therefore, its loyalty is first and foremost to Iran. In Syria, an Arab state, the Iranian regime was able to establish a major power base during the war in Syria. Syria used to be a state of 23 million people, most of whom were Sunnis. However, during the war, following the war in Syria in the last decade, some 7 million Syrians fled from Syria, becoming refugees all across the world and the region. 6 million became dislocated inside Syria, and Iran basically entrenched its power base and influence in Syria, cooperating with Assad regime. Assad regime in Syria is a regime, it's a dictatorship that based upon a minority of the Syrians known as the Alawites. They are about 10%. The Alawites in Syria are considered to be a distant branch of the Shiites. In Iraq, another major Arab state bordering Syria from the east, majority of the Iraqis are Arab Shiites, about 65%. They are not Persians, they are Arab, but they are Shiites. And so the mullah regime was able also to build itself a power base in Iraq, mostly based upon Iraqi Shiite militias. And they are acting as proxies of the Iranians, even though they are Shiite Iraqis, Arabs. Once again, like the story of the Hezbollah in Lebanon, they prioritize the religious denomination identity, meaning the fact that they are Shiites, over the fact that they are Arabs in their ethnicity and Iraqis in their nationality. Moving down to the south, Yemen, an Arab state, majority of the Yemenites are Sunnis, about 65%. There are 35% in Yemen who are Shiites, traditionally based in the northern part of Yemen. They are also known by the name of the Houthis. I guess you heard this name in the last couple of months. The Houthis in Yemen are Shiite conglomeration. In 2014, they have conducted a military coup, ousting the Yemenite government, which was predominantly Sunni. And since there has been an ongoing war in Yemen between the ousted Yemenite government who flee to the south part of Yemen and the Houthis who control the northern and central part of Yemen. The Houthis are massively armed and supported by the Iranians. And then finally, if you look, there is another figure colored in yellow representing Gaza Strip, which is very significant component in the Iranian crescent of axis of resistance. The reason it's colored in yellow is because the Palestinian factors in this crescent, namely Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Palestine, two militant Islam Palestinian organizations, are very significant component of this axis of resistance that Iran nurtured, armed, support, and advanced. The issue is that unlike all other proxies that I mentioned before, Hamas and Islamic Jihad are not Shiites, they are Sunnis. So you may wonder what bring together to the table Sunnis, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad with the other axis of resistance, Shiite militias. The answer is, of course, they all vow to eliminate the state of Israel. A major part of the Iranian hegemonic vision is the elimination of the state of Israel through a master plan that is known by the name of the Ring of Fire. The plan of the Ring of Fire basically says that once these armies of terror, established arms financed by the Iranians, are set and ready, they will all simultaneously attack Israel from all directions. Hezbollah from Lebanon, Iraqi Shiite militias from Syria and Iraq, Hamas and Islamic Jihad from Gaza Strip, and in the circle, in the secondary circle, the Houthis in Yemen. They will all attack Israel at once from all directions and bring Israel to an end. In the context of this master plan of the Ring of Fire, there is a very significant role, particularly for Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Their role has two major phases. One is to exhaust Israel through repeating military rounds. And indeed, for the last 40 years, this is exactly what Hamas and Islamic Jihad have been doing, and it has been intensified following the taking over of Hamas on Gaza Strip in 2007. The repeating military rounds between Israel and Gaza Strip under the rule of Hamas since 2007 are not random. They are part of this long-term process, master plan of the Iranians to exhaust Israel through this repeating military round. A major component or feature of that plan is to exhaust Israel's soft belly, which are the civilians, the cities, the infrastructure. That is the reason why Israel has been attacked with dozens of thousands of rockets and missiles and drones launched from Gaza Strip, deliberately targeting Israeli civilians, cities, and infrastructure. It is not random. It is part of this master plan. Another significant component of this master plan is what is called the unifying of arenas. In Arabic, it's called Wahdat al-Sahat, meaning the day where these all armies of terror together at once simultaneously attack the state of Israel, to eliminate the state of Israel. October 7 was supposed to be that day. And that brings us to the question, why did Hamas launch the war? Well, now we can understand a couple of the things. Like, for example, we talked about the power struggle between Hamas and Fatah. And so for Hamas, thinking that October 7 is the day of unifying the arenas, Hamas basically was under the impression that now it's going to crush Israel with its colleagues of the axis of resistance. And by doing that, Hamas not only will crush Israel and eliminate Israel, but Hamas will also once and for all decisively win the power struggle over leadership of the Palestinian people. The other thing is, of course, the fact that Hamas was under the impression that October 7 is the day of unifying of the arenas. Hamas had some good reasons to think that. Why? Because in the months before the war, before October 7, there were meetings held by the heads of the axis of resistance. The meetings were held in Beirut and in Baghdad and in Iran itself in the August 2023. And Hamas heard from its colleagues Hezbollah leader, the Iraqi Shiite militias, even the Iranians, a message that was like along the line of like, we are willing, ready, and able. Another major reason for Hamas' decision to launch this war was its intention to try and to block the process of reconciliation and normalization between Israel and the Arab states, a process that has begun way before when Israel signed with Egypt in 1979 a peace process, 1994 a peace process with Jordan, and then in 2020 the Abraham Accords, set of agreements signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, Israel and Bahrain, Israel and Sudan, Israel and Morocco. In the last year before the war, there has been accumulative reports indicating that there is going to be also an Israeli-Saudi rapprochement. This process of Israeli-Arab rapprochement, normalization, enormously disturbs the Iranian regime and enormously disturbs Hamas and large parts of the Palestinians who object the concept of normalization before the solution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that has been quite clearly one of the major reasons why Hamas also launched that war, basically trying to cut, sort of speaking, to block the process of normalization. Are we heading towards a multi-front war? This has been major question since day one of the war. And what we noticed since day one of this war was that the Iranian regime has decided to apply an interesting tactic. The tactic is to use its proxies, to activate its proxies, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iraqi Shiite militias, the Houthis in Yemen, to conduct an escalating but very well calculated escalating military pressure on Israel, but not only on Israel, on the United States presence in the Middle East, in international trade, commerce in the Middle East as well. And the purpose of this graduate pressure, military pressure, orchestrated by the Iranians through their proxies, the purpose in the end of the day is to put pressure on the international community, particularly the United States, to pressure Israel to end the war in Gaza. Why does the Iranian regime want to end the war in Gaza? Because the possible scenario of the downfall of Hamas rule in Gaza is a bad news for the Mullah regime in Tehran. Why is it a bad news? Because the major card that the Mullah regime has been using all along the way to infiltrate to the Arab world, to entrench itself in the Arab world, to take control over parts of the Arab world, the major card was the card of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Mullah regime positioning itself allegedly as the defender of the Palestinian, allegedly as the one who will liberate Palestine. The Mullah regime couldn't care less about the Palestinians. But for the Mullah regime, the story of the conflict is a major pawn. And he has been extremely successfully using and utilizing that pawn in order to entrench itself in the Arab world. In other words, for the Mullah regime, the continuation and escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a strategic interest. Hence the importance of Hamas and Islamic Jihad for the Mullah regime. It is a marriage of convenience. The Mullah regime benefits Hamas and Islamic Jihad because they are perpetuating and escalating the conflict. Hamas and Islamic Jihad benefits the relationship with the Mullah regime because they gain a very generous support of the Mullah regime. Finance, military, diplomatically, which enable Hamas and Islamic Jihad to carry on their radical agenda to eliminate the state of Israel. Indeed, when you look across the region, you see how the tactic has been and is applied across the Middle East with an endless attacks conducted by the Hezbollah on Israel, Iraqi Shiite militias attacking both Israel as well as American presence in the Middle East, the Houthis in Yemen that are attacking maritime, global economic trade in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Strait. You could see Yemen, you could see it sits on one of the most strategic locations on this planet. This is the passage of Bab el-Mandab that connects the Red Sea on the one hand and the Middle East and the eastern basin of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean on the other hand. This is one of the most significant global trade routes, with some 15% of global trade is crossing through these passages. So you can understand that this is putting a lot of increasing pressure. The United States and some Western allies have assembled a coalition, Guardians of Prosperity, to push back, to fight back the Houthis' threat on global maritime on this passage. It should be clear, the missiles and the drones that the Houthis are launching and attacking on a daily basis are not produced in Yemen. They are produced in Iran. The military know-how is provided by the Iranians. At some point, Israel has been, for the last couple of years, intercepting the attempt of the Iranian to build this ring of fire, and mostly by attacking hundreds of times Iranian-affiliated military targets in Syria. That's the reason why you heard in the last years that Israel has been constantly attacking in Syria. The idea here is to intercept, to dismantle the Iranian ring of fire master plan. In the early days of April, there has been attack in Damascus, resulting in the killing of most senior Iranian Revolutionary Guards officer who is responsible for the whole operation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards in Syria and Lebanon, together with some other Iranian top senior leaders. That resulted in, a couple of weeks later, a massive Iranian direct attack on Israel. You may remember that in the night of April 14, 15, the Iranian launched a massive attacks of drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles on Israel. That attack was overwhelmingly intercepted by a coalition led by the United States of America, including Israel, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, who basically were able to intercept 99% of these incoming rockets, drones, and missiles that were targeting Israeli territory. That, of course, signaled yet another escalation in the process or trajectory of the Israeli-Iranian upbuilding conflict. Israel reportedly retaliated in a very limited way, attacking some spot in Iran in proximity to one of its nuclear facilities in Natanz, not so far from the city of Isfahan. Reportedly, Israeli jets attacked and eliminated anti-aerial surface-to-air batteries that the Iranian deployed in this area. The Israeli response was very limited. Meanwhile, as you probably know, the skirmish between Israel and Hezbollah along the Israeli-Lebanese border continues almost endlessly on a daily basis, resulting in a situation where today all of the Israeli communities in a distance of some 3 miles from the Israeli-Lebanese border, many of them were to a large extent totally evacuated. Some of them were partially evacuated. We are looking at some 60,000 Israelis from the north that have been evacuated, and they moved to other areas, to safer areas, to stay out of the range of missiles, rockets, and drones Hezbollah in Lebanon is launching on a daily basis. These are all missiles, rockets, and drones manufactured in Iran, provided to the Hezbollah by the Iranians. Interesting enough, you should notice that the Lebanese themselves are screaming and urging Hezbollah not to drag Lebanon to a war. They are saying to Hezbollah, this is not our war. We do not want to be part of that. However, Lebanon is only an empty shell, because though it has a government and political parties and an army, the real boss in Lebanon is Hezbollah in Iran, because Hezbollah basically kidnapped Lebanon with its Iranian weapons. And so the Hezbollah is the one dictating in the end of the day, the Lebanese, every aspect of their life, to the point today Lebanese are openly urging the international community to save Lebanon from the iron fist control of the Hezbollah in the Iran. It may be too late for the Lebanese. Their state has been occupied from within by the Hezbollah, by the Iranians, under the banner of the resistance and allegedly liberating Palestine. This whole process of this escalation, gradual escalation, obviously has a very severe potential to result in the end of the day, a major burst of violence, basically expanding into a regional war. That potential exists there all the time. Up until now, both Israel and Hezbollah are basically keeping their skirmish, the exchange of punches, as I said, in what I call a zone that is between the red line and the orange line, meaning currently it is estimated that none of the sides, meaning Israel or Hezbollah, has an interest in really expanding those skirmish into a wide total war. But on the other hand, we are looking at an evolving situation, an escalating situation, constantly escalating situation that has, of course, a very significant, dangerous dynamic, because it has the potential to result in a massive all-out war. The Hezbollah justifies its attacks on Israel, saying that it is as a support for Hamas and the people of Gaza Strip, and it is part of this whole axis of resistance. In other words, the Hezbollah says, by doing that, I am manifesting my commitment to the issue of the axis of resistance. However, shortly we will see that many people in the Arab world don't really buy that. And that brings us to talk a little bit about the Arab world and the war. Look, there is a lot of criticism in the Arab world on Hamas and Islamic Jihad. That criticism, it did not start in October 7. It was there before October 7. It has been mounting after October 7. The people in the Arab world, or many circles in the Arab world, are saying to Hamas, you dragged Gaza Strip to havoc. You took control over Gaza Strip violently in 2007. And ever since then, you have sacrificed Gaza Strip, your own brothers and sisters, at the altar of your radical agenda. More than that, there are people in the Arab world and circles in the Arab world, and many, that says to Hamas, not only that you sacrifice your own brothers and sisters at the altar of your radical agenda, you do that at the altar of the Iranian regime, the same Iranian regime who is butchering Arabs across the Middle East, in Iran and in Lebanon and Iraq, in Yemen. The same Iranian regime who butchered, by the way, your brothers, the Palestinians in Syria. Thousands of Palestinians were killed by the Iranians and their militias in the war in Syria in the last decade. The cartoons that I'm showing you are just a small sample of many cartoons published in the Arab world, basically reflecting those sentiments in the Arab world, the criticism on Hamas. So, for example, you see to the right-hand side on the top, you see the puppet here is the Iranian regime, and he's holding two puppets. One says in Arabic Hamas, the other one says Islamic Jihad. The script beneath says Gaza Strip. This message here, of course, is clear. The Arab world, the criticism says to Hamas, you, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, you are nothing but a puppets in the hands of the puppeteer who operates you, and you are sacrificing your own brothers, sisters in Gaza Strip at the altar of the puppeteer of the Iranian regime. A similar concept is reflected in the bottom to the right-hand side. By this time, the puppeteer again is Hamas, is Iran, but the puppets is Hezbollah. It's the red glove that you see, and the other one is the Houthis in Yemen. Exactly the same concept. Arab proxies that serves as puppets in the hands of the puppeteer, the mullah regime in Tehran. Interesting one is the one you see to the left. You see that to the bottom to the left, the cartoon actually has two parts. you could see that to the left-hand side, there is this figure standing up, shooting with a pistol, which represents, of course, the Mullah regime. And beneath that figure, you see there are two figures. One is white and the other one is black. They are armed. You could see they have rockets on their backs. And the white figure represents Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The black figure represents Hezbollah. Above them, you could see an arrow pointing towards Israel. You see the Israeli Star of David. The signal has been given, and now we are moving to the second part of the cartoon, and now you see that the white figure runs to fight Israel, meaning Hamas and Islamic Jihad are running to fight Israel once the signal has been given by the Iranians. However, the black figure, Hezbollah, remains in its place. And those of you, maybe some of you could notice that when you look closely, you see that the black figure is chained to the Mullah regime that stands and gives up the signal. The idea here is going back to what we talked about before, and this is the concept of unifying of the arenas. The Arab world are saying to Hamas, you caused the Palestinian people their biggest catastrophe ever since 1948 because you believed that the day of unifying of arena was October 7. But you were misled. And basically what happened was that you did what you did on October 7. Now Gaza and you are facing the rage of Israel. You brought destruction, death, and havoc on Gaza Strip at the service of the Iranians and the Hezbollah, but they remained behind. They didn't join in. They left you alone in this campaign. Few words about the day after. Hamas is not going to disappear. Hamas is deeply rooted within the Palestinian, it's deeply rooted in the region, it's part of the Muslim Brotherhood, the biggest mass movement of the Muslim Sunni world. Hamas is not going to disappear. The objective here is not to eliminate Hamas because it's irrelevant. The objective here in the end of the day is to create conditions where Hamas cannot any longer continue and dictate its radical agenda and the Iranian radical agenda, as it has been unfortunately able to do for the last 40 years. That objective requires two major things. One is to crush Hamas' military spine. It's not to say to hunt down the last person of Hamas and the last rocket, but to crush its military spine, its major military power that was built for the last 20 years in Gaza Strip, 24 battalions, some 35,000 military personnel. This is what Israel has been doing for the last 8 months in Gaza Strip, dismantling and crushing Hamas' military spine. Today, it is estimated that Hamas basically does not function any longer as an army as it was, but rather more as a entrenched and separated small units as Israel continues its military pressure on Hamas. The military pressure is one component. The other one, which is not less significant, of course, is the political and diplomatic one. States in the region, major Arab states, Egypt and Jordan, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, are basically not fond of Hamas, to say the least. In fact, they would like to see Hamas disappearing, but it's not going to happen. However, they do have a major interest in limiting as much as possible Hamas' ability to continue and to dictate its radical agenda. And so that brings us to the day after, in the sense that once Hamas military power is crushed, and once there is a willingness of those major Arab states to move forward and to take practical part, participating in setting conditions on the ground in Gaza Strip, that in the end of the day will guarantee or make sure that Hamas will not be able anymore to continue and to be the sole player in Gaza Strip that dictate the reality. Hamas probably will be part of some sort of a future political structure, but not as the sole one who dictate a military trajectory. This is a major difference between the things, and of course, that should be, in the end of the day, the realistic, I would say, outcome of something like that. Other thing that this war once again illustrates is the danger that the mullah regime in Iran presents, not only to Israel, but to the whole region and beyond the region. Hamas and Islamic Jihad kidnapped Israelis and took them hostages. Hezbollah kidnapped Lebanon and took it hostages. Iraqi Shiite militias took Iraq as hostages. The Houthis in Yemen are taking the world hostage in the global trade. It's all orchestrated, financed, armed, guided, manipulated by the mullah regime in Tehran. It is impossible to exaggerate talking about the disaster that this regime has inflicted on the region. One other significant component in the context of the day after is, of course, the issue of what we saw since October 7 in the context of the international community, particularly the very disturbing expression of anti-Israel expressions in Western circles, very disturbingly and painfully, but not surprisingly. Some of those circles are circles that represents intellectual and academic elites in the States and Europe. We are all familiar with that. I'm saying not surprising because the script has been there on the wall for a long period of time. What we see today is an unfortunate, bitter fruit of a very toxic process that has been evolved in the West for the last generation, if not more. And one of the major segments of this toxic process, maybe the most significant one, is the destruction, to a large extent, of the educational process, of the educational work. And I'm sure that you are not surprised to hear that many people, of course, express disappointment and criticism on the level of education, at least in some disciplines in the West. And that definitely results in, or one of the major reasons for the very disturbing phenomenon that we see today. No, I came across in this poster that was published in social media. Allegedly, it was done by students in Harvard. I don't know to say if it's correct or not, but I do think it to a large extent represents the essence of the challenge, educationally speaking. You see that these are slogans and narratives and sound bites and buzzwords that became very prevalent in the some circles in the West following October 7. And they are basically reflecting, to a large extent, I would say, the challenge of the failure of education. I mean, you know, when I'm looking at these slogans, you see that all the buzzwords are in a big capital words, but when you look closer, you find, for example, the word context written in a very small words. And so I would say that if we want to really illustrate the need for a change, I would say that there is a need to replace that poster with that. This is the essence of real education. Knowledge, context, nuanced understanding, endlessly pursuing of information, critical thinking, understanding sequence of event, chronology, understanding the relationship between events, what comes first and what comes second, cause and outcomes, put knowledge to the test of reality. All those things that in the end of the day are so critical for the level of education and the effectiveness of education, all those components to a large extent has been unfortunately pushed aside in the last generation, resulting in the very disturbing picture that we see today. And obviously there is a very significant need to address that challenge. I think that today more than ever, to a large extent, there is a growing understanding of the need to address that challenge. And just before concluding my presentation, I'm very glad to inform you that starting as of September this year, 2024, we will be in the United States of America for a period of almost 1 year until July 2025. to be able to address the many requests we receive to provide our educational content. We have a different programs, we have a different variety of programs and content that we offer apolitical knowledge about the Middle East along the line of what I just mentioned, the real work of education. And so you are very welcome to be in touch and explore the possibilities to do some events for the community. This whole has to be done through the national structure of the JCCA. Leah Garber, the vice president, is leading this effort. And I do hope that we'll have the opportunity, of course, to get together in person, maybe for more educational programs during that 1 year program that we are doing in the United States from September this year until July next year. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm concluding my presentation and opening this session for your question. Thank you for your patience.
All right. I think it's better without the, maybe.
Are we on mute? Yeah.
Oh, he can, it doesn't matter. He doesn't need to see us. He can hear us. Go ahead.
Yeah, so who is keeping track of the nuclear capability of Iran during the current time? So hopefully that they don't gain a nuclear capability.
Yes, as part of the challenge that Iran, the regime in Iran presents, to be more accurate, of course, the whole issue of the nuclear Iranian program is a major source of concern. For a long period of time, we all know that the Mullah regime has been playing, cats and mice with the whole story of this nuclear project. It's a reason to be constantly concerned. I think that the best way to illustrate it is to say, look, this is the disaster that the Mullah regime has inflicted upon the region without nuclear military umbrella. So obviously we can just understand what does it mean if this regime will have a nuclear military umbrella. The Western powers, on the one hand, are aware of that and understand that, and there has been an agreement signed, as you may recall, the JCPOA during the time of the administration of President Obama. There has been different approach and views vis-a-vis that agreement. Some people think that it was a good agreement. Some people think it was a disastrous agreement. I think that the most significant thing to say about this agreement in the end of the day is reminding ourselves that that agreement is anyhow was supposed to have a sunset a couple of years from now, which means that following that, the Iranian regime would have been totally free to continue and pursue its program. By then, you can understand based upon my explanation, the Iranian regime would be already entrenching itself deeply, almost irreversibly in different parts of the region. And once again, remember, the Iranian regime has interest in the perpetuation and escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Any other questions?
I have a question. So where does China, Russia, and the rest of Europe stand on this conflict?
Well, it's a large picture. China, Russia, the rest of Europe is, of course, not one conglomerate, one piece. China and Russia are very close with Iran on the one hand, but on the other hand, Russia and Iran, for example, has also conflicting interests, particularly, for example, in the context of Syria. They both joined hands to save Assad regime, but now they save Assad regime. Now they're basically kind of like fighting for the bare skin, sort of speaking. China is playing all the arenas. China is a very significant partner of the Iranians. China is also a very significant partner of the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates. The Chinese are interested in two things and two things only. One is energy security and the other thing is food security. And to that end, the Middle East is enormously significant for China. The Chinese, by the way, has been flirting for a long period of time Israel, but their position vis-a-vis the war up until now was very, I would say, chilly towards Israel, which of course I would say it should call also on the Israeli side to some reflections about the nature of the warm relationship with China. The Chinese at some point understood that they may step a little bit over line and basically try to kind of like balance, sort of speaking, their very unilateral approach, sort of speaking. But in the end of the day, the Chinese are playing the game according to the Chinese needs and the Chinese interest, full stop. Western powers, again, it's not conglomerate, it's not something that you could see as one. I mentioned before the US-led coalition, guardians of the prosperity, including the UK and France and Germany, which are basically trying to push back the Houthis' attacks on global trade. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, we saw and hear different narratives and perspectives reflected by those Western powers vis-a-vis the war, or vis-a-vis the way Israel is conducting the war. For example, the French president has become at some point very vocally critical of Israel's in the war, almost bordering accusation of like Israel is conducting war crimes. So it's not easy to say, it's impossible actually to put all of them in one boat, but I would say that the guiding line when you look at China and Russia is they are looking for their interests and they will do everything to fulfill their interests, meaning mostly playing on both sides of the arenas. And as of the European and Western powers, I would say that we see all the time this inner tension in their policy between real politics and what I call ideal politics, when they are trying kind of like to square the equation, sort of speaking, which many times in the end of the day results in the inability to secure some strategic interests. I think that this is something that has been characterizing Western policy vis-a-vis the Middle East way before the war. I think it's further emphasized following the war.
Questions, anyone? No?
I have,
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know. Hi, Avi, it's Natalie.
Hello.
Can you describe a little bit more the characteristics of the Arab party that you were talking about, the Sunnis and the Shiites?
Yes.
Like, I want to understand. I always thought that the Shiites were a more militant approach, but if you're telling me Hamas is Sunni, I just wanted to understand a little bit more of like, what is it, can you compare it to like Democratic, Republican, or how is that different in that region?
Yeah, thank you. No, I would not compare it to Democratic and Republican. I'll try to do it concisely because it's a very long story. Maybe if we'll have the opportunity to do something in person in the States, that would be a great opportunity to elaborate on the whole issue of the Sunnis and the Shiites. They are both Muslims. Sunnis are majority, 85%. Shiite are minority, some 13%. As I said, the rift go back 1400 years ago in the 7th century around the issue of who is entitled to lead the Muslim world. There are many differences, gaps theologically and narratives and politically and culturally and emotionally between the two camps. There is some common denominator other than the fact that they are both Muslims, and that is the fact that they both have built in a very extreme radical agenda, both the Sunnis as well as the Shiite. The Shiite, by the way, the Shiite, which is a very fascinating issue for itself, has a very apocalyptic outlook of mankind. It is the Mullah regime in Tehran, which is based upon the Shiite clergies, are basically motivated or very much deeply inspired by the very apocalyptic aspects of the Shiite narratives. And so there is, like in the Sunni Islam, in the Shiite Islam, there is a very strong component which is very non-tolerant. Obviously, that is not to say, of course, that there are not other translations. There are more moderate / pragmatic translation, both within Sunnis and Shiites. But since you asked me particularly about the combatant, sort of speaking, aspect, or the militant or the extreme aspect, it exists both within Sunnis and Shiite. Shiites, by the way, like large sectors within the Muslim Sunni theologists, are very hostile to Jews and to Judaism. In fact, Shiites views Jews as an impure that you basically physically have to stay away from. So these are a couple of components that are just kind of like, just to scrape the surface. It is indeed very fascinating topic to elaborate. I hope that we'll have the opportunity to do it sometime in the future.
Another question here. So what's your opinion of the Palestine demonstrations on the college campuses here?
Well, there are many, I would say there are many layers to that. Obviously, I would say that there are a couple of things I think that really fuel those demonstrations. One of them is the fact that, as I said before, the whole story of the conflict, unfortunately, was to a large extent flattened into sound bites and narratives and buzzwords. And it was not and is not presented in the right proportions, historically speaking. It's not presented in the many complex layers it has. And unfortunately, the responsibility for that doesn't lie on the students' shoulders. It lies on the professors' shoulders and other people that were supposed to be provider of knowledge, like media people, like intellectuals, like professors in academia, like cultural icons, who unfortunately choose the easy path, sort of speaking, by echoing a very simplistic, I would say, narratives, without really exploring or understanding, and let alone without really the ability to explain to their audience the many complex layers of this conflict. So this is one component. My criticism is not on the students. I mean, young generation comes and go, but there are always these phenomena that characterize young people. They are very enthusiastic. They are looking for something to be part of. They are longing to be part of, particularly in our age, in the age of the social media, in the age of like social alienation, sort of speaking. There is a huge emotional, deep need for students or young people to be part of something, and particularly if this is something that is presented to them in a romantic perspectives, though it is very much different from the reality, but it doesn't matter because for them, this is the reality. And this is something that they feel that they can come around to. And again, it goes back to the failure of the educational system. Another reason is, of course, the presence of a pro-Palestinian, pro-Arab factors within those circles who obviously echoes the agenda and their narratives. And for them, it's a kind of like low-hanging fruit, sort of speaking. And I would add to that another, I would say, component that you may, of course, know that unfortunately, there is a large portion of Jews who are also part of this criticism. And that, of course, can be understood in different ways. But I think that one of the issues here is that I think talking about American Jewry particularly is that once again, there has been overemphasis on wonderful, beautiful values that are embedded within the concept of Tikkun Olam and spiritual identity and, doing good and all those wonderful things that are part of this whole set of beautiful ideas. But I think that unfortunately, less has been put in the context of, in order to do Tikkun Olam, you need to understand the Olam. You need to understand how the Olam is functioning. and that part has to a large extent been neglected. And when, unfortunately, young students, American Jewish students, are coming across these narratives that are very compelling and very powerful and very emotional, again, regardless of the fact to what extent they are accurate, it's basically caused many times for young American Jews, as you probably know, to flip over and actually to become very vocally criticizing of Israel. I think that these are major reasons for what we see today. And also, I would add to that, of course, what seems to be a very non-inspiring leadership of the administrations of the universities that very clearly, I would say, in most cases, fail to address the severeness of the situation, in the sense that, unfortunately, Jewish students and professors are actually exposed to intimidation in the campuses. But I think that in the end of the day, again, the issue here are not the students. The issue here are the people that were supposed to educate. And in my perspective, I don't think that they are doing a good job. As an educator and as a professional Middle East scholar, I'm sorry to say that.
I have a question. Obviously, the death toll in Gaza is awful, and I'm wondering if if there's any type of propaganda campaign going on to educate, to get the civilians in Gaza to speak out against Hamas. I mean, they're getting slaughtered, they're being sacrificed by Hamas, clearly. And is there any campaign going on to get them to give up the locations of where hostages are being held or where tunnels are, so that their people will stop being slaughtered in this war? Is that happening at all?
Well, I mean, I don't know to say campaign. I would say that I would estimate, here I'm wearing my ex-intelligence hat, that there are attempts to reach to information and intelligence through appealing to these people in Gaza Strip, and some of them are responding. I don't know to say a campaign, but you accurately said, the tragedy of Gaza Strip is that, to a large extent, I would say, and again, it goes back to what we said before, that unfortunately, because some very inaccurate narratives so deeply embedded within some Western circles discussion vis-a-vis the whole story of Gaza, one of the tragic outcome of that was that those narratives and the people who stand for those narratives, who are coming from a place basically very sympathetic and solidarity with people of Gaza, with Palestinians, which is totally legitimate, of course. Basically, what they did was achieving the total opposite. Why? Because, to simply put that, by embedding those narratives, occupation and genocide and ethnical cleansing, which has nothing to do with reality, by adopting those narratives, and basically what happened was that they exempted Hamas from responsibility. And so when you exempt Hamas from responsibility, the bottom line is exactly what we see, because Hamas openly say, we don't care about our brothers and sisters in Gaza, it's the world's problem. But Hamas governs Gaza Strip since 2007. Had Hamas was held accountable, maybe the whole situation was totally different. So yes, I mean, I'm talking with people from Gaza Strip. I obviously read and see what's coming from Gaza Strip. Obviously, it's very tragic in many aspects. I mean, I don't know even one single person here in Israel that celebrates the death of innocent civilians in Gaza. That being said, I mean, there is also a need to remember, as a fact, that Hamas is from Gaza Strip. Hamas is not a foreign power that occupied Gaza Strip. Hamas is from Gaza Strip. The people of Gaza Strip, many of them are Hamas. Why do I emphasize that? Because it goes back to the issue of accountability and responsibility. And those are things that has to be out there in the discussion, because going back to October 6th in the sense of, let us continue with the same old story of the old narratives that sound wonderful, but don't really reflect reality. Or let us continue with exempting Hamas and the Palestinians from responsibility. It's going to result in the same result. It's going to be resulting in a very disastrous results. And I just want to make sure and understand something and very clear about it. I'm talking here about the Gaza and Hamas and Palestinians based, referring to your question, but there should be no doubt, there should be not less a rethinking and reflection on the Israeli side. And there is a lot of criticism, and I would say large of that criticism is very legitimate one on Israeli side. But in the end of the day, when we talk about narratives and the impact of narratives in the discussion, in the context of the Western discussion about Gaza Strip, the whole story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there is a profound need to reevaluate many assumptions, narratives, and perspectives that have been embedded in the discussion, because failing to do this reevaluation is going to make things not better.
The idea about Benny Gantz's resignation from the War Council, do you think this is a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, again, it depends who do you ask. There are people in Israel who criticize that move. There are people who welcome that move. You all know, of course, that Israel is going through a very challenging times, including, of course, in the context of the political system. But again, it's a move that some people say that in the end of the day could result in a political change in power in Israel. Some people say that it would not impact. I think it's something that just have to be viewed in course of time. For the time being, it doesn't seem like, at least from where I see it today, it doesn't seem like it has been causing some very significant impact in the context of the work of the government. But again, we need some time here to have, I would say, a more perspective to evaluate that.
Are there any?
Yeah, I have one more question. The October 7th attack, would you say that was well planned, or in the other case was Israel kind of lax and kind of not as attuned to what was going on?
It was unfortunately both. I mean, clearly it was an attack that was planned sophisticatedly for a long period of time. And at the same time, it was also clearly a colossal failure of Israel's defense forces to commit their supreme mission, and this is to defend Israelis, just defend the Israelis and defend the state of Israel. Unfortunately, it was a combination of these two things.
So much. That was just wonderful to get your perspective. I hope that we can bring you to New Orleans when you come to the United States.
Yes,
Definitely, I'll be very happy. I've been to New Orleans a couple of times, really enjoyed it. It's a very special place. And of course, we will be more than happy to do that. As I said, we have a very nice, large, significant menu of very high level educational content. We'll be happy to share it with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shalom from Israel. Bye-bye.